It's the eve of the regular season, so let's get into some season projections. We'll get into it. I've got my Stanley Cup picks, what will happen with the Sabres, and also what you think will happen with the Sabres. What do our listeners think the Sabres are going to end up with point total-wise? That's all coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, that does include our YouTube channel. You can check us out, watch the show on YouTube just by searching Locked On Sabres. Joe DiBiase coming to you on a Thursday, the eve of the regular season. I am excited for the season to start tomorrow. 1 o'clock puck drop against the New Jersey Devils in Prague, Czechia. And we are right. I mean, the Sabres have practiced. We, I think, know the lines for this game, which I'll get into here very shortly. And we'll talk a little bit about the Devils, tomorrow's opponent, and Saturday's opponent, of course, coming up on today's show. But I do want to get to my season projections for this season, the 24-25 season, who I think is going to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, where I think everybody's going to slot in, where I project the Sabres to be, my Stanley Cup projection, and also I've got my awards picks going into the year for the Hart Trophy, the Coach of the Year, Vezina, Rookie of the Year, and for the Selke. So that's all coming up today on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase. One non-Sabres thing that I want to get to that I think is put it in the department of projection, if you will. The number one undoubted story of the league to track going into the year is whether or not Alex Ovechkin is going to break Wayne Gretzky's goal record. It is going to be tight. It might happen this year. He is at 853 goals. It is 41 behind Gretzky that would tie the record, 42 to break the record. And man, what would Alex Ovechkin's over-under goal total be? In fact, I should have looked that up before I got started here because I might project it's just barely below that going into the season. We'll see what FanDuel's got that up. But Ovechkin getting the record, if it does happen, of course, it's almost undoubtedly going to happen later in the season. So, if it does happen, the Sabres will not be the home team for it. They could be the road team for it. Ovechkin over under, 30 and a half goals. All right, I was wrong. Way lower than I thought. I would take the over on that, by the way. I think their whole season's going to be about trying to get OV goals. I would take the over 30 and a half goals. He needs, again, 42. But again, it's either going to be this year or next year. We know it's one of the two. He is either going to be, breaking the record at the end of this year, or he's going to be just a couple of goals away next year. He's going to be, if he scores 28 this year, which would be his career low, by the way, for a full season, he'd be 14 goals away going into the next year. Like, we would just know. There's no scenario where we don't know he'll get it next year unless there's injury. Knock on wood, that doesn't happen. I really hope it doesn't because I can't wait to see Ovechkin break that record. I think it'll be one of the coolest moments in hockey history when he does it. A record that I can't believe is going to get broken. I would have never dreamed in a million years would get broken. And I can't dream that in the next 50 years it's going to get broken. But hey, maybe in 30 years, Alex Ovechkin Jr. or the third is going to show up and be dominant. Anyways, let's get to the lines for what the Sabres are going to have against the Devils tomorrow. And I'm assuming there's going to be no change between now and then. And I feel safe in assuming that because we've had multiple practices in a row now where this has been the exact combination. And it would be Lindy changing things at the 11th hour. It seems that this is what he wants to start the year with, what he wants to try. We know Lindy Ruff, though, going back to his days here, he still did it in New Jersey a little bit and in Dallas, that he is a line juggler. He might go halfway through the first period with these lines before he decides that he wants to shift it up. So what the Sabres are going to walk into this season with is a first line of Tage Thompson, Alex Tuch, and JJ Peterka, a second line of Dylan Cousins, Jack Quinn, and Zach Benson, a third line of Ryan McLeod, Jordan Greenway, and Jason Zucker. And one listener pointed me to a comment Lindy Ruff made actually today that I had missed about Ruff and Greenway. Greenway, I've been very hard on this offseason. I am not a fan of his game, and he is somebody that I've been kind of projecting that he'll kind of fall out of favor or he'll fall out of the lineup for the Sabres, and Lindy's not talking that way. Lindy said he loves Greenway's game and that he's the perfect type of player for what he wants to do. But, I don't know that he knows what he has. Because when describing Greenway, he talked about his back checking and he talked about his speed. And the moment I heard him talk about the speed, I went, I don't think you know what you got. So I'm not to criticize Lindy on that front, but that's the one player I'd want to watch for. Let's see if you think you know what you've got and you've actually got something different. But for now, Greenway is in good standing. Fourth line, Lafferty, Aube-Kubel, and Malenstein, which means on the trip that are in line to be healthy scratches, Peyton Krebs, Yuri Kulik, and Lucas Rusek. Does Kulik get a second game start? Does he get in there in game number 2? I don't think Lindy's going to give a guy a spot, even on this trip, just to do it. I think it's more about winning. I think if the team were in a different spot, Brian Koziel, my coworker at WGR, made a good point this morning that if the Sabres were a team that's made the playoffs for the last couple of years and they were on this trip, then sure, put Yuri Kulik in. But you're on the 13-year playoff drought. GM might be under fire, under pressure at least. You got to win. You can't play games. So I might think that that's going to be their lineup forward-wise for both games. The blue line, Dahlin's going to start on the left. Not my favorite. I've been on record for years about this. I think Dahlin is a better player on the right. Dahlin's been on record that he likes the right better. I like Dahlin on the right, but that is not where he's going to start. And again, I don't think he's a bad player on the left. He's still incredible on the left as well. I just think it's a little better on the right. So Dahlin's going to play with Yoki Haru to start the season. Bo Byram and Owen Power look like they're going to be together, with Power being the one that's on the right side, and then Matthias Samuelsson on the third pair with Connor Clifton. And then Jukka-Pekka Luukkonen in the starters net. No surprise there at all that Luukkonen will be the guy. The extra is on the blue line, by the way. Dennis Gilbert, Jacob Bryson, Cal Clegg. Those will be the three that will not play, I would guess, in either game. So that's what we're looking at for them. For the Devils, by the way, one big absentee that we've known about is Luke Hughes. Their stellar young offensive defenseman that is just really getting into his own in the NHL. He is not going to play in this game. He was ruled out for 6 to 8 weeks back in the summer. He's not ready to return. So no Luke Hughes in this game for the Devils. The Devils, though, are, I think, a more realistic idea to take a giant step from last year to this year. We've said this when talking about Lindy, that the problems the Devils had last year, to me, had nothing to do with their talent. It had nothing to do with their roster build. And for me, it had nothing to do with their coaching with Lindy. It had everything just to do with injuries. I think they just had 1, 2, 3 too many injuries. I don't think you can survive. How many teams in the league could survive missing your number one center for a chunk of the season, your number one defenseman missing a chunk of the season, both your goaltenders missing chunks of the season, including the number one, other players on your number 2 center, Nico Hischier, I believe I have that right. Let me double check that. Missed a bunch of games last year. Yeah, Hischier played last year. Okay, no, 71. So we missed 11, but so there was a stretch there where he didn't play either. Not as much as the other guys. It was injuries. That was it. I think the Devils are going to be right back at it this year and being a great team. So that's one little giveaway of my upcoming season projections, which we will get to when we come back. But that Sabres-Devils matchup tomorrow, I do think the Devils are a better hockey team. Absolutely. I think the Devils are a better hockey team. I think the Sabres will do well to split. They'll do well to split these 2 games against New Jersey. Anything above that, 3 points would be great. 4 points would be a dream, of course. I would take 2. Because this is one of the better teams in the East, in my opinion. When we come back, who I've got making the playoffs in the East, who I've got in the Stanley Cup, who I've got winning awards this year in the 24-25 season for the Buffalo Sabres and the NHL, all coming your way on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Got to talk about the Bruins, by the way, because we got some more details on Jeremy Swayman today that makes it look even uglier. That's coming up, but first, a word for FanDuel Sportsbook. This is it. Get your futures in before the season starts. Over under on the Sabres point total at 88.5. If you want to check out some of the player performance props, like I just mentioned, over under 30.5 goals for Alex Ovechkin. You could bet that. You can probably find a bet for him to break the record, too. I would bet that's out there as well. All your hockey futures, all your prop bets available at FanDuel.com. Hey, we should really talk about also that you can now bet the Buffalo Sabres in a game because we've got a game tomorrow. If you're looking for a little bit of action, or even if you just want to look and see if the Sabres are underdogs or not, and they are underdogs in this game, by the way, no surprise there. And it's not just hockey. Baseball playoffs is the sports equinox. We got games every day, all month long, whether it's college football, baseball, hockey, basketball later in the month, and of course, the National Football League. And NFL fans, you could start your NFL season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, maybe tonight during Thursday Night Football, you can check out the latest stats, view some live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. While you're in there, like, oh, let me see what maybe a Baker Mayfield in fantasy, and you want to check, oh, what's Baker Mayfield doing? And then while you're there looking at the stats, you want to make a bet at the same time. It's all right there in the FanDuel Sportsbook app. You don't have to go app to app. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to get started. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Season projection time in the NHL. Lots of fun. I feel comfortable. I feel good. I don't think there's a lot to figure out in the NHL this year. The League of Parity, I think, is not that hard to project. Not that hard to predict. So here we go. My Eastern Conference predictions. Once and only once. Right before we get the season started, this is what I got happening in the NHL season, where I'll have the Buffalo Sabres. By the way, before we get started on that, I asked all our listeners, text line, Twitter, YouTube, how many points do you think the Buffalo Sabres are going to get this year? And then I took every number, there were a lot of them, and I added them all up, and I divided by the amount of people that voted, averaged it out. The average point total amongst our listeners for the Buffalo Sabres, 93.3. 93.3. Which, in 2 of the last 3 years, would have been enough to squeak into the postseason. So 93.3 is the average. The lowest point total somebody voted was 80. Nobody went below 80 that I saw. The highest was 119 and winning the President's Trophy. That was the only bold soul out there that was willing to go that high. Second highest point total that somebody voted on was 102. The guy could have been sarcastic, I guess, with 119 a little bit, but I'm counting it. You put the number down, I'm counting it. So 119 was the high, 80 was the low, 93.3 was the average amongst our listeners. Let's get to what I got for this season. We'll start in the Atlantic Division. My #1 team in the Atlantic Division, I'm going to go chalk. I'm not going to get too crazy here, bold prediction-wise. I think that the Florida Panthers are going to win the Atlantic Division, the defending Stanley Cup champions. I just think they have too much high-end talent. They are not as deep as they once were, but that top 6, Barkov, Reinhart, Tkachuk, Verhaeghe, Sam Bennett for one more year. Right now, Rodriguez is in there. To me, the third line, Lutz Sarainen and Lundell, could take big steps this year. Those are 2 players I've liked a lot. Maybe a little bit more of an expanded opportunity. I think they can make up for the players that they've lost. So I like the Panthers. I don't think that they're going to skip much of a beat. I think they're going to be right back as the top team in the Atlantic. And I think they're going to do it by a wide margin. I don't think there's going to be much of a race. I think they're going to be #1. And that's because everyone else in the Atlantic, I think I have a reason to bet against. #2, though, I'm going to go with Toronto. Toronto's a regular season powerhouse. It's the playoffs where they really screw up. Regular season powerhouse, though. And for one more year, and maybe only one more year because Marner and Tavares are in contract years, they have got one of the most offensively dynamic teams in the NHL. They just have so many players up front that are dangerous. It's too much talent up front. Interesting thing about the Leafs this year, it does appear they are once again going into the season with the idea that Willie Nylander is going to be a center. But they've never really stuck to it for a whole year. This year might finally be that year because Tavares is probably out the door and they might need Nylander to switch to center full-time going forward. So Matthews, Nylander, Tavares down the middle, that is as good of a center group as you're going to get. Still got Marner. The reason I think there's a gap between them and Florida is the goaltending. I just don't believe in Joseph Woll as a starting goaltender in the NHL. I think that could really blow up in their face. And Anthony Stolarz is their number 2. They don't even really have a reliable number 2. So I am in on the Leafs kind of not being in the race to be the number 1 team in the Atlantic Division, because I just don't think the goaltending is going to hold up for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So Joseph Woll, that's the reason I've got them down at number 2 and not at number 1. All right, number 3 in the Atlantic Division. And actually, I think this is the Atlantic team that goes the furthest in the playoffs. So you might be asking, wait, Joe, you have them 3rd in the regular season, but you have them going the furthest in the playoffs. I've got Tampa finishing 3rd in the regular season. I think it might look very similar to last year, where they're kind of on cruise control early in the year. They're that veteran team, Stanley Cup experience. Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody knows when to hit the on button. Nobody knows ever. They know when to flip the switch. January. That's what happened last year. Slow start. Didn't look great first couple months of the year, but they were, I don't know, they're kind of slow playing it. Injuries, they'll be conservative with, right? I think Tampa will flip the switch when they need to. And the thing I like about them the most when we get to playoff time is they now have a completely healthy Andrei Vasilevsky. And if you look at the Atlantic Division, he's the only, solidified stud goalie. Bobrovsky even is someone that's been up and down, streaky in the past. He has great years, and then he has bad years. The elite goalies are ones that don't really have down years, and that's really Vasilevsky. So, hot goalie come playoff time. I think Vasilevsky could be huge for them once we get to the playoff time. But for now, I got them 3rd in the regular season. All right, my top 3 Metro teams on the year. Let's go first with Carolina. Number 1, this is another team where I was talking to Mike Schopp about this yesterday, that they're like the Baltimore Ravens of the NHL. They're just always really good. And they're just no one really ever is like, oh yeah, they're going to be in the Super Bowl or they're going to be in the Stanley Cup. For the Hurricanes, it's always just weird. They're always great. They always have great numbers. They got a great coach and Rod Brindamore, just talent all over the place. The blue line's always been one of the best. What is the problem? A lot of times it's been goaltending. Peter Kochetkov might really stabilize that this year, or be he might be the one with the most upside that they've had in a long time. And they still do have Freddie Anderson back there to stopgap as some insurance. So I like Carolina goaltending-wise, more optimistic than I've been in the past. So I think the talent's there, and I think that they're going to be the number 1 team in the Metro. Number 2 in the Metro, I'm going to go with the Rangers. Shesterkin, one of the best goaltenders in the NHL, veteran team in New York, and a team that, my pet peeve on them used to be the center depth and the center group. But in the last 2-3 years, Mika Zibanejad has absolutely established himself as a number 1 center in the NHL. He's awesome. Zibanejad is awesome. And Vinny Trocheck is in there now. Philip Cheadle. They figured out center as the last couple of years have gone on. Blue line is terrific. Love their top 4. And Shesterkin's an elite goaltender, so I've got the Rangers at number 2. That was tough, though. I was between the Rangers and the Devils for number 2. I'm going to go the Devils, though, at number 3 in the Metro Division. The Devils overall, we just talked about them a little bit. They have a superstar player. Jack Hughes is a superstar. They have depth around him. They have good defensemen. Dougie Hamilton's a good number 1. And I'm wondering if there's another step, though, for Luke Hughes. Luke Hughes, who I loved in the draft process. Remember, I was someone that I got off this because it just seemed more ridiculous as I read more and kind of dove in on these 2 players. But if you remember back in 2021, there was about a week early on when the Sabres won the lottery where I was like, should we think about the Sabres drafting Luke Hughes over Owen Power? And I got talked off that very quickly. Nah, don't do that. And Luke Hughes, last year, 3rd in the Calder voting, all rookie team, 47 points, looked awesome offensively, averaged over 21 minutes a night. Got to put a little bit more weight on. He definitely would get pushed around a little easier than you want, but I think there's a great level of talent there playing with his brother. So Luke Hughes is a big wild card there. If he shows up and is an elite defenseman, that could really push the Devils up even further. Wild card picks. I really struggled with these. Really struggled. Here's a lesson, or here's a takeaway I have from trying to pick my 2 wild card spots. The door's wide open for the Sabres. I think those 6 teams are money to make it. Would be floored if any of the 6 teams, Florida, Toronto, Tampa, Carolina, Rangers, Devils, I'm including the Devils in that. I just think it was injuries. Those 6 teams, I would be stunned if any of them missed. There is not another team I think has to make it. So those wild card spots, there's a lot of teams competing for them. There might be like 8 teams competing for them that are all realistic. But it is wide open. I'm going to start, though, with a team. Well, let's talk about their goaltender. Let's talk about the Bruins and Jeremy Swayman for a moment. I do have the Bruins number 1 in the wild card, but I don't feel it's flimsy. It feels flimsy at best. We've heard this week about Jeremy Swayman, their number 1 goaltender, stud goalie, who, by the way, is the second leading favorite to win the Vezina this season. He was called out by his president of hockey ops, Cam Neely, this week, who said there are 64 million reasons why he should be on the team right now. Swayman's agent kind of took offense to that. And we found out from this documentary, Face Off, that has been on Amazon Prime Video this week, that Swayman talked about, he's in this documentary, and he talked about how he has, stemming from their arbitration hearings last year, Swayman has a list of all the criticisms the Bruins had against him in those arbitration hearings. And it sounds like they really stuck with him. He read them all throughout last year. And one in particular that he talked about, Swayman said, quote, "My biggest knock was that I wasn't trustworthy in the playoffs." Check. The team got up in front of a hearing and told him that we don't trust you in the playoffs. Listen, some guys might understand the business, right? And say, oh, it's arbitration. It's business. They're negotiating. It's how it goes. I know how I am. I'd be thinking about it. I'd be thinking about it all year. And it sounds like Swayman was, and he still carries it over. My team said they don't believe in me. And now they're trying to get me for less than I'm worth, than I think I'm worth. I don't think that's ending. I think Swayman is going into the year unsigned, and I don't see an end in sight. And I think the Bruins are in trouble without their number 1 goaltender. But that being said, I've learned my lesson about the Bruins. I am not picking against them until I see it. They didn't have Bergeron last year. They didn't have Krejci last year. They had maybe the worst group of centers going into the league last year, and they just made the playoffs anyway, and we're great. I'm not picking against the Bruins. I will pick them to get a wild card position this year, the number 1 team to get a wild card spot. Again, though, I wouldn't be stunned if they missed because of the goalie. Number 2, I'm going to put Ottawa in. I like Ottawa's roster. I don't like Ottawa. Hate Ottawa. Always have hated Ottawa. Always will hate Ottawa. Ottawa, though, they got some talent, man. Like that top 6. Stützle, Giroux, Tkachuk, Batherson, Josh Norris. They added David Perron in the offseason, although I think he's been more in the bottom 6 lately. I really like Ottawa's roster going into the year. I think their blue line is sneaky underrated. Jake Sanderson is a stud. And finally, I think they've got goalie down. I think they made some questionable moves. Matt Murray and then Jonas Korpisalo, way too much invested in those two. I don't think this is a long-term fix. I think Ullmark probably leaves after a year. And they traded a first-round pick for him, so that was expensive. But for now, Ullmark's good. Ullmark is going to stabilize that goaltending. And I think Ottawa's got a complete roster that I think is worthy of making the playoffs. So I don't have the Sabres in. I will say this, though. Sabres are my first team out. Sabres are my first team out. In it to the end, I'd pick them to miss by 1 or 2 points. I like the Sabres' odds in their roster, their style, their coach, the whole scope of everything. I like the Sabres more going into this year than Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Detroit, Washington, who I think is really old, and then, of course, your teams, the Islanders this year. I like the Sabres more than all of those teams. I don't like them more than Ottawa, and I can't bet against Boston, so I've got the Sabres just missing the playoffs this year. Probably somewhere around 93 points, which is where our fans, our listeners voted the Sabres to finish. When we come back, my Stanley Cup prediction and my prediction for awards this season in the NHL coming your way on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Sneaky Joe DiBiase. Welcome back, Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase. Thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen. For your second listen, be sure to go check out our 2024 NHL season preview if you want more talk like this on Locked On NHL, a 6-episode series bringing the best local insight to make you the most informed NHL fan heading into the season. You can find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Let's get back into my predictions, though, for the upcoming season. I am on the Atlantic Division Roundtable in that 6-episode series where we went round and round. The bottom end of the Atlantic Division hosts Detroit, Ottawa, Montreal, myself. Who am I missing? Someone else. Anyways, let's get to my Stanley Cup predictions and my award winners coming up this year. By the way, Lindy Ruff, third leading favorite to win the Jack Adams. How about that? Third leading favorite to win the Jack Adams. Sheldon Keefe, by the way, the guy replacing though, is the favorite in New Jersey, which I guess I'll start there. Jack Adams, I think, is going to be Sheldon Keefe. I'm going chalk. I'm going with the favorite. It's not even as much about Sheldon Keefe. Jack Adams is about how good were you last year? Did you make a change? And how good are you this year? Devils were bad last year. Sheldon Keefe comes in. I think Devils are going to be really good this year. That's how you win the Jack Adams. It might just be injuries, but I think that is how that's going to go. Hart Trophy this year. I've got Connor McDavid winning the Hart Trophy because I think he should win it every year. And I think the only thing that might hold them back from giving it to Connor McDavid every year is they don't want to just give it to a guy every single year. They don't want to seem unoriginal, if you will. They like a good story. So McDavid didn't win it last year. In fact, they've been going every other. Last 4 years, McDavid, Matthews, McDavid, McKinnon. I think McDavid this year is probably going to be the guy to get his 4th MVP. He also won it in 2017. So Connor McDavid, no surprise there for my Hart Trophy. Selke, I'll go with a guy who's actually not the favorite, but I'm going to pick Austin Matthews. Matthews, it's almost like he scores too many goals to win the Selke Trophy, because they want to give it to a guy who has around like 60, 70 points. Matthews might be too good for that. But I just think you got to respect the all-around play. Matthews is like the best two-way center in the game. Don't worry about that he scores 70 goals. Don't let the 70 goals take away from how good he is defensively. He's amazing defensively. He should win the Selke, and he hasn't yet. I think he finished 3rd last year. Maybe a little bit of evidence they'll let him get close. Do it one more year, and I think they'll give it to him. My Vezina winner for the year is going to be UC Saros. I've got UC Saros in Nashville winning it. Saros has not yet won the Vezina, but he has been top 6 in voting 4 years in a row. He's gone 6th, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Numbers have been consistently good over the years. A little bit of a down year last year. I think he bounces back this season on a good Predators team. And I think he's established enough now with a big season that he could be somebody that gets in there for the Vezina Trophy. And then Matvei Michkov, again, favorite. He looks like he's going to be a stud for Philadelphia right away. Michkov, who was the 7th overall pick in the 2023 NHL draft, Russian-born player, lighting it up in the preseason. He looks amazing, and I'm just not going to skew from that. I'm going to make him my pick. And finally, my Stanley Cup prediction for the 2024 season. I am going to go with the Colorado Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup over the Tampa Bay Lightning. I've got Colorado over Tampa to win the Stanley Cup. Colorado is a team I just wholeheartedly respect. I think they're so solid every single year, and I love the I want to bet on talent. It's at the end of the day, it's the way I am. I want to bet on talent, and Colorado is the most talented team in my opinion. They have the second best center in the game, second best player in the game, and the best defenseman in the game. Devin Taves has turned into a great number 1 defenseman at a team where he really has to be the number 2. Alex Georgiev, iffy, but you did win the Cup a couple years ago with Darcy Kemper, so you've proven to me you can win it with a league average goalie already. Georgiev is just that. And, hey, they are better at second-line center than they were last year. Casey Middlestat I like that. For a full year, I think Middlestat is a good addition for them. So I've got Colorado winning it over Tampa. I think Tampa, for me, is team knows when to turn it on. I love the top players, and I think Vasilevsky is someone that I think is going to get hot come playoff time. Someone I trust more to get hot than anybody else, other than maybe like Shesterkin when we get to the playoffs. All right, let me know your cup pick. Who do you got? I got Colorado over Tampa, and I've got the Sabres just missing out on the season. I hope I'm wrong on the Sabres part of that. Just get me to the postseason. Let's end this freaking playoff drought. Tomorrow, we'll find out if they start on the right track. Sabres and Devils, 1 o'clock puck drop in Prague. Hope you enjoy the game. We will see you in the regular season. Can't wait to talk to you next, where we will be talking about a game that has happened. See you in the regular season. Thanks, everybody, for listening throughout the offseason, the dog days of summer, draft time, free agency, trying to keep you covered as much as we can every day here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Our Locked On Sabres text line, of course, as well. If you want to hop onto that and text us during the game tomorrow, I'll have my thoughts during the game in our text club as well. If you want to become a subscriber, now's the time to do it. Join subtext.com/Locked On Sabres. Talk to you in the regular season here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.